Roanoke in 2019. So it's nice to see it now, even just virtually, in a larger space juxtaposed with Walter Andersen's work. I like to think of the works that we contributed to this exhibit are companion pieces that strengthen the concepts outlined by curator Maddie Colling. And the different themes that you identified, it's not really dissimilar from stages of grief and this fixation on dealing and processing and confronting with death, which is inescapable. Many of these artists and craftspeople have this inescapable attraction and curiosity, and sometimes obsession, that is human nature with death. So I think we're going to begin with the objects.
Wonderful. Well, just to give you guys a little bit of...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine, Melanie. Just to give you all a bit of an introduction into the structure of this program, we're going to be talking about the 4 themes that we have in the exhibition that are inherent to the works and both Jason Bouldin and Walter Andersen's process. So they are memory, ritual, wonder, and afterlife. So Melanie and I are going to be in a little bit of conversation about these themes and the works that are connected to them. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first one is memory. How do we remember? How do we forget? For many of us, memories are tied to specific places, people, or even objects. We hold on to trinkets that mean things to us or are associated with significant moments or people in our lives. Our memories are subjective and often based on individual experiences, calling forward emotions that can have little to nothing to do with our present circumstances. Memory is an act of time travel. So as humans, it is our nature to keep objects or to create works of art that actually preserve these memories. Through objects and artworks, we are able to negotiate emotions that are tied to specific memories. These pieces of our past help us to inform our present and are carried with us into our futures. Many of the works in this exhibition reflect memories of their creators or owners. They were made, collected, or commissioned to help the owner remember and perhaps even learn from the past. The image that you have on your screen here is a work by Jason Bouldin. This is called Broken Pecan in Front of Daddy's Studio. And for many of you who may be familiar with Jason Bouldin's work, he's actually the son of a very well-known portrait painter. And this broken pecan fell in front of his studio. What happens with this depiction of the tree, though, is that it really becomes this kind of poignant reminder of the father and really this passing of time. So, Melanie, you've selected several very cool objects for us to go through today that are associated with memory. And so we're going to jump into that discussion here. These might be some of my favorite objects that we borrowed from your collection. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay. So this piece is an example of a mourning necklace or a mourning jewelry piece. Mourning jewelry was something that was a practice that goes back to the Middle Ages. Initially something reserved for the wealthy and aristocratic, commissioned to keep their loved ones close to them. More commonly, the ornamentations would include pearls and gold settings and elaborate, almost sculptural elements. However, during the Victorian era, this craft increased in popularity in Europe due to the influence of trendsetter Queen Victoria, paired with the need for a new craft by wig makers who were relying on wigs being in vogue for quite some time. With the high death tolls during the Civil War and instructional guides that made hair jewelry accessible for all social classes, Americans embraced this craft and Victorian sentimentality. As people began to make their own hair jewelry and race at home, it became a female craft like sewing or embroidery. Making your own piece also guaranteed that the hair was authentic and sourced from your loved one, and added a layer of devotion to the lender of the hair. Since hair lasted long after the deceased, sometimes thousands of years, it kept a physical piece of a person with the loved one. This necklace in particular was likely made from the hair of a grandparent or uncle of Chancellor Hume, who served as chancellor throughout the 1920s through 1940s, and was credited with preventing our campus from being relocated to Jackson, Mississippi. It was gifted then by his daughter Myra Hume Jones in 1981. She said that this was worn by her grandmother and her aunts. So it was a family heirloom that passed on. We do not know whose hair it was sourced from, but likely it was made posthumously of grandparents or brothers. So I love this physical representation of a loved one, and the act of crafting it and then wearing it and that interaction with it. You're physically keeping it close to you. It's something you would interact with and touch often. And it becomes a piece of artwork in its own. So it carries with it that beautiful craftsmanship, but the memories that the wearer has of the past. This next one is a good example of hair jewelry that was more accessible during the Civil War. This is said to have been the locket of Jefferson Davis, given to a woman, Miss Mattie Blevins, in Memphis in 1867, when she met him in Memphis. This is an example of a token of friendship. So it's simplistic. It was something that was ready-made that you could collect of hair. This made this craft accessible for all social classes. And people would maybe collect celebrities' hair as well. They did that in Europe, going back much further. And so that is the lore associated with this piece that was passed down from family member to family member, and its significance. So this one I got really excited about. So this is an example of a hair locket that also has a portrait. The portrait is likely painted using the ground pigment of the hair of the lender. So this is General John Adair, who was the great-grandfather of our founder of this museum, Mary Skitwith Bowie. This is him in his general regalia, likely commissioned or painted by Mary Bowie herself, by a family member, or Mary Bowie much later. It's not known, but this would have been the height of his career when he participated in the War of 1812. So who knows how long it was passed down, but I love to think about this is a great example of utilizing the hair to further imbue the object with the essence of someone, and to record that family member and that family connection. He was her great-grandfather, so it was passed down for many generations before we received it. So I love that tidbit about the pigment, though. So this piece is not on display at the Walter Andersen Museum, but we did discuss it and how it could be a connection with the exhibit. Jason himself referenced when he was discussing his own portrait work that they act as a way of capturing who we are and where we belong, much like a family tree or scrapbook. in this case, I would like to add that a quilt could also be a record and a way to connect generations. This quilt has at least 6 members, initials of the Lewis and Walton family stitched into the patches. It's something that would have been on display and not used top your bed. It was something that demonstrated the ability of the quilter. So there's ornate florals and birds throughout, and alternating levels of embroidery for connecting each patch. So it's highly detailed and gorgeous way to showcase the quilter's skill, and then also to record the family connections there. Oh.
I'm muted. Excuse me, you guys. Those are so cool. Thank you, Melanie, for sharing those. The hair jewelry is especially fascinating to me. And like you said, the physical presence of carrying someone with you and through a piece of their hair. So I've always found that a little odd, but also very, very cool. And that we actually were able to borrow 3 pieces that feature that from your museum is just amazing. So thank you for that. The next section that we're going to be talking about is ritual. And rituals, these are important aspects of everyday life. Every culture, major life events are marked by ritual or a series of actions performed in set order. Death is an especially important event that is marked by very specific rituals based on culture and religion. And rituals and the objects associated with them serve as mechanisms for both remembering and mourning. For the artists recognized in this exhibition, ritual is an important part of their process. Jason Bouldin seeks to recognize the life of small creatures that he finds in his daily life. He often places his dead subjects on a white cloth, such as the small wren seen here. And by doing so, he really brings to mind the act of placing a body for viewing, or even the effect of a funerary shroud. And you could say the same about Walter Andersen's work. This piece on the screen is of 2 dead mergansers, and this was loaned to the exhibition in memory of Jane Mobley Shaw by her family. On Horn Island, Walter often participated in ritual as he collected and carefully observed each creature. He states that he was doing honor to their remains through painting. And this witnessing was really an important aspect of Walter Andersen's experience on the island, and a way that he coped with the harsh reality of death. Melanie, what are some of the objects in the exhibition that specifically reference ritual that we have selected today?
So we have this mourning fan. So again, back to the Victorian era was a period marked by extreme mourning habits. So we have a Victorian fan and bonnet. We do not know much about the family specifically, but these are great examples of the rituals that Victorian era people had. You had very elaborate outfits, gloves, veils, and customs. There are strict rules about how to mourn, when to start mourning, and how long. Again, it's something that's attributed to the Victorian era, which was fully embraced by Queen Victoria after she experienced losses of her own children, her mother, and then later her husband. When her husband died in 1961, which same year Civil War broke out, she entered a period of mourning, which she would stay until the rest of her life. So it didn't get quite as extreme on this side of the pond, but it was typical for someone to be dressed in black for up to 2 years. The veil that they would wear when they left the house was supposed to protect them and to protect others that would encounter them. So also what's interesting about these clothing, this type of layered clothing of gloves and veils and just layers of black that a mourner would wear, was that this is a great example of ready off the rack clothing for the first time, because the rules were so strict and the people were so superstitious that you had to immediately enter a mourning period. And if you could not buy clothing or make it at home, then you would even just go to the extreme of just dyeing your clothes black. So these are fascinating as well, and show it's a form of devotion that an artist has when they make something, but this is through a performative act and dedication to a deceased. So that would be the veil. We have a fuller outfit, but this was the safer one to travel. This would have been very typical during the Victorian era of what one would have worn. So this piece, this I think is a great bridge between Jason Bouldin's and Walter Andersen's. This is and also captures mourning in America, specifically the South. This was painted by Lester Willis. It is said to have been his first painting of death and was his response to the death of Emmett Till. He said that he drew from life to emphasize it, to speak through a picture that can't be brought into words. Lester Willis was very interested in social commentary and race inequality and social inequality amongst African Americans. And if you guys have seen, if anyone has seen Emmett Till's funeral, it was open casket. That was something that his mother had chosen to show to the world what had happened to her son. So it was later published. So this is Lester Willis's way of approaching very heavy content painted in a stylized way. That was his way around commenting and confronting death. He would do so through the use of glitter and bright colors and comic strip style. This is something that someone could easily, though, just see as a very common scene of a wake or a viewing found in the South.
Keep doing that, you guys. Thank you so much, Melanie. That's such a powerful piece. I just got so wrapped up in your description. Thank you for sharing that. This next section that we're going to talk about is actually wonder. So for the artists included in this exhibition, the concept of wonder is really an important aspect of the work. On Horn Island, Walter Andersen found beauty and even fascination in the decaying bodies of dead creatures, stopping to note color and form that he found on the dead animals. With wonder, Walter Andersen tells of finding a dead bird on the beach, writing, quote, "I did a watercolor of the dead breed. Fascinating to analyze through distinct sequences of color in a brown and gray feathered thing," end quote. To Walter Andersen, the dead creatures still held beauty. Where the artist often had to create gestural drawings or quick paintings to depict live creatures with dead subjects, he was able to take the time to study and really find majesty and subtlety in their forms. And the image on the screen in front of you is of a dead pelican that Walter painted during his time on Horn Island. And I've always been fascinated with this work because of the delicacy and really the sensitivity that Andersen painted this work with. Melanie, The artist that we featured from the university's collection also had a curiosity and wonder associated with death and the afterlife. Can you tell us a little bit about the works that specifically illustrate this theme and the motivations of the artists that created them?
So here's another a Lester Willis work, which you saw previously with the pink coffin. This spurred a repetition throughout his work of skeletons and mummies. He used this as a way to confront something, to confront death. Again, he said he covered things with glitter as it's form of device to disguise his commentary, but also to confront it in a more accessible way, because people are uncomfortable about death. So his fixation with death began as a result of the civil rights and the violence that he was witnessing around him. And then it continued into his life and became more personal when he became bound to a wheelchair and experienced paralysis. So he had death constantly on his mind in the last decade of his life. He said, "I think death is interesting because it's something that sooner or later we all will have to meet." So this was a way to sometimes subtly comment on just horrible things he was witnessing in the world, and then also his personal struggle with confronting death. This is from our beloved Sultan Rogers, who was from Oxford, Mississippi, who learned wood carving from his father, and spent most of his life between here and Syracuse, New York. He was a prolific carver. He carved things as he witnessed around him. So just like Jason and Walter Andersen, he was creating work that he observed. Some were biographical, some was observation, some was not so flattering commentary and portraits. But coffins are probably one of his most popular subjects that he created, and that was his way of showcasing his curiosity with death and the focus of the afterlife. So we have 2 coffins included in this exhibit. And he would have them in various stages of completion and stylization of the people, but specifically they were not known, for these works at least, who they were supposed to represent. In general, his commentary is that everyone eventually dies. So his wide range of portraits and personas really are commentary on human experience. So this was one that really got Maddie excited too. We have 3 of these works. I chose to highlight this one specifically. It's an owl eating a chicken by Theore Hamlet, who is one of our, whose work we have the largest collection of in our museum with over 800 works. Theore Hamlet is someone who experienced loss at a very young age. Her father was already in his 70s when she was born and died when she was a very small girl. She grew up in a very religious household and was in a rural community. So she observed death in animals around her, and she observed the loss of her father, her mother, and then her brother, still a relatively young age. So this is a piece that we could view as a triptych. There was multiple stages of observation, possibly through dreams where she became fixated One thing that is typical of Theore Hamlet is that if she had something in her mind, she would fixate it and would not feel rest until she was able to get it out onto in paint. So it's not uncommon to see her have a repetition of the same imagery until she gets it right. So whether this was a dream that she interpreted as an omen, or if this is a mixture of her observing the cycle of life and death, it's a very dark portrayal for what most people think of her work. But it's a perfect pairing with Walter Andersen and Jason Bouldin because it shows her observational viewpoint of the world to give this much attention to something that most people would walk by.
And I did freak out about that piece. Yes, I was very excited about those Theore Hamlets because they're so unusual. I do have a question about that, but we'll save that for the end. Okay. So our next section is, our last section is Afterlife. So for many Southerners, the concept of life beyond the grave is a kind of continuation or rebirth. As one author put it, the door is propped open between this world and the next. Southern folklore is especially rich with the legacy of individuals lingering after death, and many customs or home decorations that characterize the South have their roots in the tradition of managing spirits on the loose. And so you can think of painting a porch paint blue, or even the bottle trees that some people have in their yards. On the screen there is Jason Bouldin's tulips, and so there's also this concept of preserving life or giving a subject a rebirth through art making, which is what Walter Andersen and Jason Bouldin do through their work. This is especially done through dead plants and dead creatures in their works, and the artists really preserve the being in paint, enabling it to exist long after the physical body has decomposed. As you see with these lovely tulips that are just kind of falling out of the vase in this arabesque form that Jason has captured here. Melanie, do you want to talk with us a little bit about the objects that were selected for Afterlife?
Oh, sure. So this is one of many angels created by Howard Finster, who was a folk artist who was a preacher, a radio preacher, an artist, eccentric, you could say. You can go view his house where he has his work all over the property. He is someone who used art as an outlet, as a form of preaching. So throughout his work, there will be Bible verses and commentary, lots of text to describe his excitement about the afterlife. That it's not uncommon for him to write that on his work. I can't wait to meet with the angels, go to heaven. He was very prolific with that expression. And so he would refer to this as his gospel of his faith, an expression of that. So this is just a very unique piece, and we have not had it on view. We just had it recently added to our collection. So we're happy to loan it to you. So I would say that it's the fixation and the excitement of the afterlife that was not unlike Theore Hamlet's. When you have experienced that loss, to use art as a way to express that connection still with the future through your faith with your family. So you have the other objects that are the material culture objects, is keeping them here on earth with you, while these artists are using their artwork as a way to show their excitement of leaving this earthly realm to join their family through their faith. So this is a photo by Al Clayton. We don't have much backstory on it, but it is something that could be folk art by Howard Finster. We have not verified, but it's a great addition to this collection because it shows the documentation of graves. And that was one thing that Jason Bouldin referenced, is that he really wanted to be a reporter, and having artists who were artists and documentary reporters is a way to preserve a moment, and seeing something that called their attention, they're documenting that that they were living in that moment, and they took the time to pause and observe and give reference to those who are deceased, or capturing, in this case, are these grave markers, or is it capturing another artist's experience with confronting death? Is not known. So this is Walker Evans, which he was known to go throughout the South and document the conditions. So another good example of documenting something that would have possibly been overlooked. In this case, it is a child's grave. So this shows that it's not a very permanent grave site. It's not a great location, but by capturing it in photograph, they're essentially prolonging that remembrance of the deceased. So much like Jason or Walter would have observed some animal who they saw on the side of the road or out in nature, they would eventually return to Earth. This is a way to elevate and pay homage to life. So whether it's someone they knew, a human or animal or a stranger, this is using art to preserve others. So I think that's everything.
Melanie, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So we have a little bit of time set aside for questions. So if you have questions, please drop them into the comment box and we'll take a look at those. The first one that I have is the works selected from the University Museum all deal in some way with death, as was our theme. So what do you think is really the underlying fascination that artists and craftspeople have with death, so much so that they would choose to depict it in their artwork?
So that's something I've given great thought to. As an artist first, I feel like I approach the world through a different lens as an observer. And that's one thing that Jason kept saying, is that he was observing, he's recording, he's documenting. As an artist, you're observing other people, you're observing the world around you, and you're processing. And sometimes you're not very articulate. And art is an outlet for expressing yourself. And as Lester Willis said, sometimes it allows you to say what you can't. So I see it as a form of creating this pure focus on a subject. So when you're creating artwork, you're dedicating all of your attention to something. So there's, the typical cliche, like, oh, it's a meditation or it's a devotion or whatever, but it is true. You're giving something your undivided attention. So there's some beauty in that when your subject matter in this case is the deceased, or a chicken being by an owl. Those are things that are overlooked, but an artist's lens captures that and feels so much and then documents that. So, and then I would also like to say that when you approach artwork of other people's work, what you do is you first analyze why, what, how, and then you think about the more of an empathetic lens of what was their motivation? What were they experiencing? What were they thinking? What are they feeling? Who is this for? And what are they saying? So you go through all of the cycle of trying to empathize with another artist. And when you have material cultures, like with the hair, you can't help but think about, why did they make that? Did they wear it? And then you think about yourself wearing it and touching it and interacting with it. And there's something very powerful in all of these items, is that we're transferring the essence, the feelings, the devotion, the love, whatever, to an object. And that object's going to go on beyond us, whether it be art or hair jewelry or these photographs, these will live on. So, there's a lot of power in that.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I'm actually going through the process of clearing out things from my house. Mm-hmm. And I'm struck by this inability to get rid of sentimental objects. And that's, mm-hmm. of course, on a very small scale, but something like the hair jewelry that is so intimately tied to a person, that it's mm-hmm. part of their physical being, and that is still existing today here. How does that relate to, how does it change the meaning of the object when it's actually taken out of a familial relationship or a familial setting, where it's somebody's personal jewelry of somebody that they know? How does it change that when it's actually put into a museum setting like it is here in this exhibition?
I think, these take on, like with the bonnet and the fan, those are something that are, those were utilitarian. They served a purpose. We don't know who they were, but now we have this documentation. And again, it's about us trying to empathize and put ourselves in the shoes of the crafter or the family or the maker or the culture. With the hair jewelry, there is something about, it's sad if that gets lost. And so generationally, it may have become lost, those personal experiences. When Chancellor Hume's mother wore the necklace, she may have touched it and thought about the laugh or the smile of the loved one. But then it just became eventually the hair necklace that you inherited that you had to ration with when you moved or something, right? So putting in a museum allows other people to think about the context of the history of it. So it takes on this bigger meaning from it being a personal, but a commentary on our culture and our society. And I just love them. There is a revival, by the way, of hair jewelry. So mm-hmm.
That's very exciting. Yeah. Yes, I think these are absolutely fascinating. And I think when you and I were looking through the drawers, kind of picking out objects for this exhibition, we both kind of squealed when we opened the drawer and there are these hair jewelry pieces there, mm-hmm. Because they are so fascinating. It's a piece of our history that we're not that familiar with. It has this kind of macabre sentimentality about it, mm-hmm. but there's something also really beautiful about taking a portion of the loved one, like the hair, and actually crafting it into something that they wear. So very excited that those pieces are in the exhibition.
Yes.
As you mentioned, I was very excited about the Theore Hamlet that we also were able to include in the exhibition. Actually, the 3 Theore Hamlet. Yeah. And I've always been fascinated with her ability to represent kind of disturbing images, mm-hmm. with this kind of light and almost humorous effect. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the artist intended this kind of lightness to be interpreted, or is that just my modern sensibilities being laid on top of it?
It's hard to tell with Theore Hamlet because she could be influenced by other people with how she interpreted some of her works. But she could change it. She could be discouraged with the material. But I really think this could be both, either case. So the fact that she did it in a somewhat triptych, it wasn't identified as a triptych, but if you see the works on display there, it is a repetition of the same imagery with subtle changes. So when she has the narrative works like that, they tend to be from her visions. But it is so unusual as a subject matter compared to her other works. But it very easily could have been something she observed that she found disturbing. Either case, it was something that she fixated on and had to paint. So how much of that is a mixture of her imagination or vision? She wasn't taking it home to the studio and painting it like Jason. So there's going to be more of her imagination in any of her work.
Interesting. Yeah. So really it's kind of almost a bit of her personality showing through her work there as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So my last question here is, there's quite a few what we described as women's crafts included in the exhibition, such as the hair jewelry, the crazy quilt, and maybe even the bonnet and fan. And these are all such intimate objects of mourning. How would you interpret these with the perspective that they were worn and or created by women?
I think we could go down a rabbit hole with that too. That is something that I think is inherited throughout history, as women being both the source of life. Women are also responsible as the caretakers for the deceased. That's something that goes throughout every culture. So it only makes sense that women are the ones that had to put on more of a show of mourning. Women are the gentler sex too. So I think that's all tied to, goes back to fertility and our association with being caretakers and the source of life, to be the ones that are essentially in charge of the last rites in the mourning of the deceased. So I was thinking that throughout this exhibit as well, is that you can see a lot of parallels with like Greek and Roman culture too, and the depictions of women and the roles that women would have had to play. So yeah. I don't know if I answered you.
No, absolutely. I just found that really fascinating that we have so many objects that were created or worn by women. And I think you're absolutely right on that there's kind of this continuation or even the comparison between like life and death and birth and death, and like that juxtaposition there somehow it manifests in this way, that this role, I guess, that women have taken on of being the caretakers of both life and then the deceased. So really fascinating. Thank you so much, Melanie. And thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you. And thank you so much for your knowledge of this very rare collection. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'll see you soon.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I apologize. I forgot to hit the start recording button at the very beginning. So I'm going to go through a little bit of this again. But thank you for joining in for Folk Art and Memory with Melanie Antonelli from the University of Mississippi Museum's collection. And that is where we have collected a lot of the objects that are supplementary to the exhibition Bearing Witness. And we're so grateful for them for partnering with us on this exhibition and bringing it to Melanie and her help with creating this exhibition. So thank you so much. We would also like to send out our thanks again to the Mississippi Humanities Council for sponsoring this program. And if this discussion piqued your interest in all things Southern death and mourning rituals, we encourage you to visit us at the museum to view Bearing Witness. This exhibition, again, is up through February 14th of next year, and we will have many other programs associated with this fabulous exhibition. Of course, all of our programming can be found on our website or on our Facebook page, and I hope to see you all at the museum very soon. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you. Bye.